All right, everybody, welcome back to another incredibly deep diving, awesome, inspiring, purpose driven podcast today. As you know, we're hanging out with Rick. And as you heard in the interview, not only is he a real estate expert, but he also has been taking deep dives down into the world of neurology and personal development. So I'm very much looking forward to hanging out with you today, Rick.
Thank you, Jason. I'm super happy to be here. And as I was saying kind of to you before the show, your resume is so packed. I'm fascinated. I want to learn more about you. So I'm excited about just the conversation we're going to have today, right?
Absolutely. And it's funny the way that you started that, and we had permission to flip stuff back on each other during this
Yeah.
conversation. This never was supposed to happen. This was never supposed to be a platform for me. Being a therapist was never supposed to be a platform for me. I had a 1.8 GPA in high
I
school.
did too.
What?
We have the same GPA. We should start a club.
We
I've
should. I
never
think.
heard anybody else say that with so much pride.
Oh,
I'm like,
wow.
hey, look at, yeah.
So I'll give you two other names that are in the club with us. Ed
Okay.
Ed Milet,
Oh, okay.
who I'm sure you're familiar with, and he's
Yeah. My girlfriend loves
amazing,
him. Yeah.
amazing speaker and
Yeah.
insight person, and Jesse Itzler.
Who's now? Remind me who
Jesse
that is again.
Itzler playfully would be known as the husband of Sarah Blakely, the founder of
Okay.
Spanx,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
he
yeah.
has his own coaching community called Build Your Life Resume.
That's
He
right. Yeah, yeah,
um,
yeah.
he owned Marquis Jets. He wrote the book Living with a
That's right.
Seal, which is where David Goggins first got introduced to the
Yes,
world.
yes, yes, yes. Now I know.
Um,
Now I
Part
remember.
owner
Yeah,
of the
yeah, yeah. Got it.
Hawks,
So
Atlanta Hawks.
he's one point to say, okay, well, dude, we've got some
Yeah.
pretty good company there.
We have some great company. In fact, I'll recommend to you and to the listeners. It's one of my favorite Ed Milet episodes was
Okay.
where he was interviewing Jesse about,
Okay.
and then they both also had this realization about their GPAs. So we're in good
Oh man, I
esteem
feel so
with
much
some
better
really
about it.
incredible
Well, it's
human
funny
beings.
because the schooling system, which is great. My mom was a retired school teacher. My
Mm.
stepdad, my sister's a teacher. Like I have high value. I was on the school board. I have nothing but respect for the school system. They're doing the best they can with what they can work with. I did not fit in
Right.
their system. That's really at the end of the day. That's what I've kind of come to that conclusion. And there, but to be honest, I mean, to kind of dive into it, that definitely
Yeah.
created a lot of shame for me too, right? And not fitting in and not knowing where I belong and what's wrong with me. A lot of those kind of conversations I can definitely track back, and I'm still working on how do I kind of undo some of that thought
Mm.
process.
Do you
Um,
do you remember those moments? Like, I mean, you and I are not as kid-like as we used to be in some ways, at least in age chronologically, but personality we might be.
yeah,
But do you remember those first moments where you started seeing yourself as different or other, where it kind of is like, huh,
yeah,
yeah. What was
yeah.
that?
I remember early on just being like, I have no idea what's going on here. This is such a struggle for me to grasp just really basic stuff. Reading, I didn't want to have to do anything with book reports, anything required concentration or and then yeah, and then my mom having been a school teacher, it was so paramount for her that I do well in school. She knew the value of education, all that stuff. And she was a young person trying to just be a parent. She's got no idea what she's doing. And so her best way of managing that was um, not that effective, is
Mm.
the nicest way to say it. I say it that way because I know she was totally doing the best she could. Um, and it ended up with me feeling like I'm not enough, basically. And that was when I think when you're that age and you're hearing that story, it starts to be very believable. There's nobody else, especially when, I mean, I'm 54, so I was born in 1969. So this is the 70s and the early 80s where there wasn't counseling, there wasn't therapy, it's not
Right.
that it wasn't there, but it wasn't
It wasn't the
common.
therapy and counseling of today.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And
Yeah.
so, um, yeah, it was, in fact, I think ultimately it did lead to not that I didn't become a drug addict and alcoholic as a result of my mom not feeling enough or not, but it certainly was when I finally did get in front of alcohol and drugs, I'm like, oh, this is such a relief, to just feel better. Like I just wanted to feel okay, you know?
Yeah. Well, I
Yeah,
know that ties into, and we might ping pong off a few different things, not in
sure.
order, but you and I were talking a little bit about both of our love of neurology,
Yeah.
especially as it relates to self-help. And one of the modalities that I'm certified in that I absolutely love is neuro-emotional technique.
Yeah.
And it actually came out, originally started in your neck of the woods on the West Coast, but in
Okay.
Carlsbad, San Diego area.
Okay. Yeah.
And Dr. Walker, who's a chiropractor, who, guys, if you've already heard this from me on previous episodes, forgive me.
This
Rick
is
is
for
here.
my benefit.
This
This
is
is
for
my
Rick's
benefit.
benefit, but if you
This is
haven't heard
my
this on
personal
previous episodes,
podcast.
exactly. It's just me and you, man. So, right, it started off as a chiropractor who was trying to figure out, why do people have to keep coming in over and over again for
Mm,
adjustments?
mm,
Shouldn't the body know once I fix it, right, with a small, vertebrae adjustment, it should hold? And he was finding that it wasn't. And he realized, after going to a workshop and hearing how, the connection of emotions, and someone was adjusting a client while they were rethinking about the car accident. And he did that, and he's like, oh, the adjustment held. So he
mm,
started connecting it to other, what about other traumas? What about other life experiences? And that's where
mm.
he started using muscle testing and Chinese medicine meridian points and putting it all together. So years later, this was 30 something years ago, and now therapists do this and other licensed medical practitioners. But one of the big components of that is neurology, and we have something called bogus pleasure recognition, which is one of the
Mm,
ways of applying this. And I find this fascinating because anything that becomes a compulsion that we think we need in order to tamp down a trigger or a trauma is
mm.
why we have these cravings, and why you just said, oh, I feel better
Yeah.
once the substance, it doesn't even have to hit your nervous system as far as
No, I exactly.
it
I
or
would feel better when I knew it was coming, even. I
right.
didn't have to have it in me yet. As long as I knew it was coming, I already started feeling better. That's right.
So that, in regards to the three parts of our neurology, at least in our brain, excuse me, in the triune brain theory, you have our neocortex, rational thinking. I know I'm going to get it. I know it's there. I know it exists. I had a positive experience with it before. That's a rational brain. Your mammalian brain is timeless memories. So if it was stored as a positive versus a negative, which then goes into our reptilian brain, approach, avoid, survival,
Yep.
that's
The
the
amygdala.
amygdala and all that, right? The limbic system responses
Yep.
and all those things. Now you don't even need to have that anywhere near you. Just that thought as a positive approach of thought
Mm,
already
hmm.
starts sending biochemical responses into your nervous system as if it's already there in real life.
And I would just, so I'm curious, because what happens with drugs and alcohol is that it's kind of a diminishing return. In other words, you don't get the same hit you got the first time you did it, and each time it's getting less and less and less effective. But is it that, is that being overridden by this the what was the
Yeah. The
where it's,
neocortex. Yeah.
yeah, where it's already, because your brain is locked into that initial great feeling, that it keeps convincing you that even though you can intellectually see that it's not giving you what it once did, and eventually it almost gives
Neurological
you nothing.
hijacking, right? That's what we call
Exactly.
neurological hijacking.
Yeah.
The cool thing is right. One of my favorite stories about this to really, drive this home is my dad years ago came back from a cruise with his wife and big ass thing of popcorn from the cruise ship that, he was compelled to get. And, I'm like, where's that from? He's like, I don't know. On the cruise, I started craving popcorn. I'm like, it's random. So I actually had him do the protocol with me in front of me. Because, like, when I hear someone say the word crave, right,
Yeah.
I know that there's that trigger. And obviously, there's more intense words, but craving
Sure.
is a pretty strong one. And I had him, like, just, look at the pop, look at the tin, and I muscle tested it. That's the biological fight or flight, response, that neurofeedback response that we're looking for. Nothing happened. Okay. I want you to open it up now and hold it close to you and smell it, and the muscle test goes weak, right? Remember, approach, avoid,
Mm,
okay with, right? Congruent, non-congruent. What's bypassing the rational brain? Now,
mm.
that shouldn't happen. There should be no response to everything. We should be walking through the world as neutral as possible. When we
Okay.
don't, that's when we have this biofeedback kick. So it turns out, like, the emotion that we figured out and the story we figured out was, like, he got into a disagreement with his wife and she started yelling at him. And then the story, the emotion was anger and sensitive to her anger. And we go through the whole process. The cool thing about this modality, which thankfully on the West Coast, there's so many wonderful practitioners. So if you're on the West Coast like Rick, you can tap into one of my colleagues. You can go back and you can find the original event where the emotion and
Mm.
the theme that came out of this little muscle test protocol and
Mm-hmm.
go back to an original event where it got stored in your
Mm.
nervous system as a story. So the emotion was sent, it was anger.
Yeah.
And the worst part for him about that was like, I don't even know what I did wrong to have that person be angry at me.
Mm-hmm.
Went back to original event of we muscle tested it back to 10 years old. And the story was he was walking and his mouth just dropped wide open.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I was walking back from school, Scranton, Pennsylvania, 1950, whatever, you
Before
know,
the office.
before the office, right? Before the American office ever existed. So, and he was walking, and all of a sudden, this guy that he was walking with just out of the blue turned around and just popped him right in the face.
Mm. Wow.
And that was the memory. I don't know why
Yeah.
he was angry at me. So we go through the clearing part of it and reset the nervous system around that. Go back in present day, muscle test, go back to when your wife was upset at you on the cruise.
Yeah.
Oh,
Right.
fine. Okay, now let's smell the peanuts. The popcorn.
Popcorn. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Uh,
muscle test hold
um,
strong. Okay, I want you to take it, put it in your mouth.
yeah.
It was actually peanuts, actually. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, my bad. So
Okay.
COVID brain yeah, right. So and he's like, oh, it tastes stale. And like,
Mm.
so the physiological response, the biochemical response started transforming from something
Mm.
that he was craving to something that's no longer pleasing and appealing. But the
Mm.
trigger around that made him desire something to make his blood sugar
Mm-hmm.
biochemistry be remoderated.
Mm.
And for
Wow.
whatever reason, that became the thing. Now take that back to what you and I started talking about: drugs, alcohol, food, gambling, whatever you
Even
want.
sex. Yeah. Shopping. All the.
Correct.
Right. Right.
Correct. Really good pour over coffee, whatever you want to put in there.
Well,
So
that's okay. No.
that's good, especially from your coast.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So right, those are the things that our nervous system now even apply this even more so to what we can get into: money,
Mm.
success, allergic to making money,
Mm-hmm. Right. There's a
allergic to having
mindset. There's a
connection.
mindset behind that. We say
Yeah.
mindset, right? But that's such a broad thing.
Yeah.
So what you just described is fascinating, and I would love to share a story that just happened to me
Please.
recently. And I know we're getting a little ahead. I don't know if this is the right
Yeah,
time, but who
just
cares, right? We're
go
just
for
having a
it.
conversation. But so the background for me, just the short version is 5 years ago, I really started to see, after having some success and what appeared to be pretty reasonable success, I think, for most people on the outside, there was this kind of plateau. And I really started diving into all this personal development stuff. And so there's been a lot there. I'm happy to talk about any of it. But recently, what's really clear to me is there's if I hear something in my earball that is just words, there's just words are coming in, but what I hear is what's wrong with you, right? So anything critical at all, anything that alludes to you didn't do this right, you're not enough, anything like that, what I hear is what's wrong with you. And I immediately have, then my amygdala kicks in. I don't, I get defensive. I shut down. I'm quiet. I don't feel like I'm safe. I almost become a different person, right? I'm physically the same person, but emotionally, I'm just like, I'm 10, 12, 8, maybe 5 years old. I don't know, somewhere in there where all of my thinking becomes shockingly immature, right? And I don't feel like I have access to that prefrontal cortex, like wise, mature information that I normally, right? That I could just put things in context, maybe, or I could consider where it's coming from, or, whatever. Like I don't have access to any of that stuff. And it's really debilitating. And it has an impact, right? It has an
Mhm.
impact on my kids. It has an impact on my girlfriend and my family and the people I work with, whatever. And so recently I did this thing. So I've done a bunch of work with Landmark, actually. I don't know if you're familiar with
Mhm.
Landmark.
Sure.
Really, really am enjoying that. And one of the things that we did was we went back to kind of what you were just describing. It was like, what was the time where can you remember all as far back as you can? And when I was 5 years old, I was wearing some shoes that were too big for me. I didn't come from money. My parents were my dad was a minister, my mom was a school teacher. We didn't have a lot of money, so we had these hand-me-down shoes that I would they were so the boots they were so cool, but they were two sizes too big, and so I was told, you're not ready to wear those boots yet. And I snuck them on, and I was chasing the girl next door, Babette Bolick. I remember her name. If she's listening, I'd love to have her reach out to me. Anyway, so Babette, I had a crush on. She was 7, older woman, and so I'm chasing Babette around the church, and because the boots are too big, I of course trip. But I don't just trip; I trip and I fall face first into a brick planter, and I
Oh
bust open my
man.
head. You can see there's still a scar there. And then so Babette walks me back to the house. It's just 2 doors away. And I open the door and my mom's there. And of course, I'm a 5-year old. I've got blood just streaming all over my face, all over my clothes. I cannot imagine how terrified my mom was when she opened the door, right? But all I knew was I was bleeding. I didn't know if I was about to die. I didn't know what was going on. I'm
Right.
5 years old. And the sense I remember her saying, don't get blood on the carpet, right? And then
Yeah, it's
the
classic, right?
feeling, the feeling that came with that was, what's wrong with you? Now, I'm sure my mom did not say what's wrong with you, right? I'm sure my mom was doing whatever she was doing, but that was a world that I felt like I lived in. And here she is. She's got 2 twin babies at home. Like, I
Mm.
can look at it as an adult now and go, my mom did totally normal things, right?
Right.
But for me as a 5-year old, how it hit me and where I landed was that place. And so we went back to that time in this back to this group. So we went back to this time, and I had somebody say to me exactly the way I was hearing what's wrong with you over and over and over again. And at first, I had to train them to say it exactly the way I was hearing it, and then be there with it as an adult, right? And at first it was, and I would say something like, hear what you're saying. I'm okay with what you're saying, and I'm totally available to hear anything else that you would like to say about that. And the first couple times I said it, I was saying kind of monotone and like it was words I didn't even mean. And then all of a sudden I started saying it. I was crying, right? Just out of
Mhm.
I'm like, it was like I was there. It was crazy. And I
Yeah.
did that a few more times. And then it's almost like I became an adult right there in front of her. There's like 4 people in this little group, 5 people maybe. And then I was able to say it as an adult. I totally hear what you're saying. I'm okay with what you're saying, and I'm totally available to hear more, whatever it is that you want to say about that. And it had a dramatic impact on this way that things were landing for me. Have you
Mm.
ever heard of something like that? Is that kind of
Yeah.
similarly like you're retraining the neuropaths or something like that?
Absolutely. Well, remember, when you're in that memory, your biochemistry is activated just like it was that at that point. And I know, in organization, the organization is Landmark, but in those type of workshops where they're bringing in other people to simulate family members, right? You now have that in I forgot, the family constellation is something that came out of the marriage and family therapy field, and now it's become its own thing, and people are now doing coaching trainings on this, and which could or could not be dangerous because you're dealing with
Yeah,
lots
you
of
got to be
trauma
careful.
potentially,
Right, right.
so those type of things. But the beautiful thing about what you're talking about, that came, the Landmark started as the outcome of est back in the right
Yes,
60s
right.
and 70s.
Werner
So
Erhard, right.
exactly, so all of that stuff was like getting in there, and a
Yep,
lot of that stuff was also probably happening around the time of psychedelics first hitting and
yep,
people going able to go deeper and able to process and able
yep,
to be in a community and to share and be vulnerable and intimate.
yeah.
But what you're doing for sure from the neurological level, when something represents something, our rational brain, and you're moving that aside, because of course your rational brain can say, you're not my mom. I know you're not my mom. And I
Yeah,
know I'm not 5 years old.
yeah, yeah.
But once you're able to figure out a way to move that aside and you get into the mammalian and reptilian part of your brain, the timeless memory and that approach, avoid, fight, flight, flee,
Yeah.
paradigm,
Freeze, yeah.
exactly. All of that stuff can then start to be healed. This is what's so interesting about me as a licensed therapist who's evolved in a way a little bit past or a lot past the stuff that I was given in graduate school and why I never went back for a doctorate in my field.
Mm,
Because one, it's not going to pay me any more money. Two, it's stuff that's older
Mm-hmm.
and they may have some new published stuff, but it's not necessarily, there's no course on neuroscience. There's no
Mm.
course on psychedelics. There's no
That's
course on
fascinating.
all of these
Fascinating that
things.
that stuff doesn't exist.
It does in certain programs, and a
Right.
lot of the time, many of them are out in the West Coast. They're in Boulder, Colorado. They're in California. They might be, in a few different places. Some of the schools are accredited. Some of the schools are not accredited. Some
Yeah.
of the
Right.
schools you can actually get a state license, in
Mm.
multiple states with. Some you can't, and you might have a degree where you can't do much with.
So is it still like kind of woo woo? They could like woo woo science to the mainstream. Is that, do you think is part of it?
Maybe because this is kind of like taking it back into like all of the wonderful things that are happening in the real estate world, where you have all of the coaching that's now taking place, something that you're doing now as a
Mm.
professional to help other realtors, where at a certain point it had to be woo woo. What do you mean I need a coach? What do you mean I need guidance
Right.
on learning how to sail? You know,
Or mindset, right?
or
That's
mindset, right? Which
yeah.
is, I playfully, and I feel so bad every time. And anybody who's heard me reference this, it's kind of like the Lululemon of like, you put on a pair of yoga pants from Lululemon, now you're a yogi. I mean,
Yeah,
like,
yeah. Right.
you listen to one
Exactly.
mindset podcast, right? But
Yeah.
what does that mean? Mindset is like, okay, mindset, I think, is that outcome of all of the ways that you're changing your neurology, you're
Yeah.
changing your physiology. The
Yeah.
mindset is the outcome of that, right? Can you reverse engineer it by like just listening to downloading every single Ed Milet podcast? Sure.
Right.
That's obviously going to help. That's obviously going to have a big part of it by surrounding yourself with positive people, by going to Landmark, by going to, any personal development groups, by working with a therapist, working with a really good coach, working with
Yeah.
someone like you in your world. Is there still stuff underneath the hood that needs to be dealt with? Absolutely. But that's why none of these things are a one size fits all. And
Well,
anybody who claims to be, I would
there's
run from.
yeah, right, right, totally. There's also, to me, there's a real value to action versus just like passively learning. Like I can listen to all the podcasts I want, but
Yeah.
until I get
You
in
still got to
to
apply it.
actually doing what you did with your dad and
Right.
him being willing to go in and explore and everything, that's action. What I did that's action. I feel like there's it's so common to listen to the great books and listen to the great which are all great, but if there's no action that goes with it,
Yeah.
nothing's really changing, right? You're
Oh,
aware that things can change, and that's where I get hung up on coaching. Like I want to coach to make a difference. It means nothing to me if you listen, you go, that sounds really great. I don't care if it sounds great. I want you to do something different. How
yeah.
can I inspire you to actually take action and be accountable? How can I inspire you to take action and do something different on a regular basis, not for a week or 2 weeks,
Yeah.
that kind of thing,
And
right?
I think this applies to both your field in the real estate space, separate from the coaching part of your life, where, think about like so many brokerages out there. They amass amount of agents to keep their license there. And, if that person does one sale a year, great, they get a percentage off that if they do, right? And obviously they want them to do better than usual. But I can just think about like, some of these brokerage houses that just let anybody hang their license there because
Yeah.
like whatever, I'll make some money off of it. It doesn't cost me much,
Yeah. Costs
whatever
almost
it is.
nothing to have them. Yeah. Right.
Correct. Versus those that are so particular with here's the trainings I want you to do. Here's the
Yeah.
episodes I want you to watch. Here's the
Yeah.
meetings that we're going to do every week. Here's the like
Yeah.
you're going to, like you said, you have a call, a coaching call after our
Yeah.
conversation,
Yeah.
and making those things mandatory. And what's going to be the, it's kind of like we get the business or we get the people in our life that we kind of deserve, and that's based on the effort and output and experiences and that we get worked on for ourselves.
Yeah.
So, and I see the differences between, just give an example, Ryan Serhant, who in the worst point of the pandemic, his first year being in business in his own brokerage did $1 billion worth of sales versus
Yeah.
some guy or woman here in South Florida who's on the park bench, the bus bench since I was in elementary school with the
Mm.
same picture on the park
Yeah. Right.
bus
Yeah.
bench since I've been in elementary,
Famously the same picture, right? Our industry's
famously the
the
same
worst. Yeah.
picture since
Yeah.
1989,
Yeah.
right? Who, may be making their quotas and maybe, but why aren't they internationally known? Why are they only still on those three same bus benches in the same locale and they haven't grown and opened up multiple
Well,
offices? And
this is the thing. It's like and going back to the mindset, it's the difference between knowing the right things to do and then doing the right things.
Yeah.
right? And so you can be coached and learn. I can tell you, look, I can make it. Look, I have a daily navigator where I'm not going to hold it it's old school, but I have a thing that I do every single day. I talk to 10 people every day. I meet with 3 people every day. I write to, like it's a thing.
It's a system.
It's a system. On Mondays,
Yeah.
I talk to current clients. On Tuesdays, I talk to my VIPs. On Wednesdays, I talk to leads. On Thursdays, I talk to later of the week. On Fridays, I develop new bit. Like it's a whole system. The point is, it's action that's being taken that's going to turn into something.
Yeah.
I could go to Landmark and just sit there and listen, and it would have no impact. It would be like, wow, this is really cool, but it really won't change my life. Or I could do the things that they're telling me to do. I could hire you as a coach or a therapist or whatever. Us talking about it is going to have some impact, but you saying, hey, here's what I want you to consider. Here's the thing I want you to, or here's the thing that we're going to do. Here's an exercise we're going to do, whatever it is. That's going to have the real impact,
Yeah.
right? Do I
Yeah.
have that right?
Yeah. And it's also us, holding people, us being held accountable.
Right.
I'm in a weekly accountability group with a
Yeah.
business program called Business Finishing School. And one of the beautiful things about that program was you have the option to be in an accountability group. And um, the one that I'm in now, we meet every week on Zoom, and we even extended it to doing every quarter, doing a 4-hour Zoom call. And then even after we started doing that, with every quarter doing a 4-hour Zoom accountability group, in addition to the weekly, we now just completed our third annual retreat in person. And
Nice. Okay. Yeah.
we just did that on a cruise,
Yeah.
which was kind of cool. So
Good. How many people are in the group?
so now there's 4 of us,
Okay. Yeah.
and
Great.
2 are in Texas, one's in
Yeah.
Minnesota.
Perfect.
So yeah, so it's
Yeah,
great.
so it doesn't have to be huge. And so I just
No,
want to, because I know that some of your audience is, 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds in some kind of sales, insurance, whatever. And listen, having an accountability group is, to me, the number one thing that you should have, because
talk more
I'm
about
the
this.
kind of guy
Yeah.
I've got all kinds of great ideas, right? Especially in the morning. Man, I am inspired. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. It's going to be great. And then what happens is my day starts happening and I get distracted, or something good happens and I go, oh, that was great. Now I don't have to do that thing I was going to do. Or something bad happens and I go, that was bad. Now I don't want to do the thing I was going to, or I forget what I was supposed. So what I do is I literally every single day, that list I was telling you about, I actually make a list every day. I check it off. I sign it like a contract and I send it out to my accountability group every morning before 9 o'clock. And if I don't send it by
Yeah.
9, I send them a thing that says, hey, I'm not sending it yet, or I'm not going to do one today. I don't have to be held accountable every single day, but generally for me, Monday through Friday, I want to be held accountable. So I do all the things, I check all the boxes, and at the end, I write 3 things I'm grateful for. I write a little mini journal, like 1 or 2 lines. I had a tough day today. This thing came up, or I had a win today. I closed this deal that I didn't expect was going to happen, or whatever it is. And then I send it back out to that same accountability group by 6 o'clock. I say, hey,
Mm,
remember that thing I said I was going to do this morning? Well, I did it. And and anybody can do that. You don't need me to do that.
right. Right.
I started doing that. I kind of, out of necessity, I did that, right? I know the right things to do, but doing them is kind of hard. And when I know that I've told somebody else to do it, I'm going to do it, I'm more likely to get it done. In fact, I run somewhere around 98% efficiency. It's rare that I don't complete all my tasks, because as I
Mm,
get through I start going, oh, shoot, I said I was going to do the thing. Well, I told all those people I was going to do it, so I'm going to make sure I get this thing done.
yeah.
Versus if I was the only one, I'd be like, well, I mean, I don't really have to do it. I justify and I make excuses or whatever, and stuff doesn't get done. And I probably run like around 70%,
Yeah.
so.
Well, I think that's one of the, going into the whole, mindset podcast, social influencer type of thing. Andy Frisella, who is also one of those big, like Ed Milet type of guys, his podcast, it used to be called the MFCEO podcast. Then it went into a lot of politics and a lot of other
Mm,
whatever stuff. So unfortunately, he lost me as a listener,
mm,
but he
gotcha.
has the 75 hard
Oh
workout
yeah.
program. It's
Yeah.
his.
Yeah.
So he's the
Yeah.
guy who came up with that. And it
Yeah.
was brilliant because every day, right, you either do it or you don't do it. This is not like a half-ass start over, like, oh,
Yeah.
well, you kind of did a thing, right?
Yeah.
It's 2 workouts in a day. You have to drink your water. You have to have your meal plan. But every day you need to take a progress pic. And it
Mm,
has to be, you have to click everything. Obviously,
yeah.
there's an honor system. And I'm sure
Yeah.
there's many people who are going through it and kind of like, but you're cheating yourself, right? You're
Yeah.
cheating yourself if you don't do this 100%.
Yeah.
But it's that every day you need a
Yeah.
progress pick
Exactly.
of
Yes.
yourself. It doesn't matter where you're starting,
Yeah.
and it's full. And it doesn't matter if it's negative 20 degrees out. One of them
Yeah.
has to, I mean, obviously, you have to take, if you open up your garage door and you work out and it's, in your garage
Yeah.
and it's cold and whatever, fine.
Yeah.
But, but I think that's where the accountability comes in. And you hear stories of people having transformations that were then nothing, then not much going for them. I mean,
Yeah. Right.
internally they didn't realize what they could have going for them.
That's right. Exactly. That's right. And it's just for me, I remember feeling actually they were written on my report cards going back to the beginning of where we started at the 1.8 GPI. I don't know, did you ever have this on your report card? And mine would say Ricky has potential but doesn't seem to use it. Did you get those?
Of course.
Right? It was like
Yeah.
he's funny, he's a nice kid, seems like he's plenty smart, but he's
But
not
where is
doing it.
it? But where
Yeah.
is it?
What's he
Right.
doing?
Yeah.
And so, but that was in my head was like, I just don't live up to my potential.
Yeah.
And it feels so great to have where I still, in a lot of ways, I know I've got a lot more potential, but I don't feel like I'm mired in not living up to my potential. Like
Yeah.
I have a lot of satisfaction in kind of where my world is today, who I am as a person, where I'm at income wise, making money, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of satisfaction that I'm closer to living up to my potential, but largely based on the action that I took, not just the words that I heard come into my ears.
Yeah. And I think this is where mentorship is such a powerful
Oh, yes.
engagement, right? So imagine like us in elementary school. I'm 5'2", which means I was not much taller then at that
Yeah.
age, right?
Wait,
Uh,
this is another thing. Guess what?
what?
Guess what I was in high school, how tall I was.
Um, 5'5".
4'7".
Stop.
I was 4'7". I weighed 70 pounds in high
Wow.
school.
Wow.
I wrestled in the 98-pound West wrestling class, which is the smallest one. And I
Yeah.
would weigh in with my book bag in my hand back when we had book bags. Yeah, so I get it. I get being
Wow.
I'm 5'10" now, so I actually did get taller. But
Something happened. Wow.
yeah, but for my first 2 years of high school, I was tiny, so I get
Wow.
it.
So there's still hope for me. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think it's still gonna work out.
45. I'm still waiting for that growth spurt. So,
Yeah,
but I see like the people that were the most impactful for me were the people that took that extra little step in that extra little
yes,
initiative of
yeah,
mentorship. And I even see that like, when I talk to people in, that's why like even in sobriety, those who have chosen to go through the 12 step and it's worked for them, what's one of the big things of really working this is not just working the steps, but having someone to be your sponsor.
well, and even more importantly, and this is how we have our coaching group set up as well, is then sponsoring somebody.
Correct.
So when you talk about mentorship, that is a two-way street that both are highly, highly valuable. In fact, I would argue being a mentor, being a sponsor in a 12-step program, but in the real world with civilians, you would call it mentorship.
That's right.
That the value of being a sponsor or a mentor is very high, and it's regularly missed because people think, well, they think like, oh, I don't really have anything to offer, or I don't really have time for that, or who wants to be mentored by me. Well, I'll tell you what, there are people that you have something. Everybody listening right now to this call, everybody has somebody that wants what you have. And it might be your job to go find them and go, hey, I noticed maybe it's somebody in your office. It could be a kid. It could be Big Brother, like, or what is that called? Big Brother,
Big
Big
brothers,
Sister,
big
or whatever.
sisters. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Or there's mentorship programs in most communities. That is so incredibly valuable to be that person for somebody. And usually what I'm hearing myself come out of what's coming out of my mouth to like give somebody advice or my experience or whatever, I'm also like, man, I really need to listen to that myself too.
Yeah.
Right. And there's a part of me that's like, oh, if I'm going to tell somebody I'm going to do this, that I want to make sure I'm living up to that standard, that I'm doing the same things that I'm asking somebody to do. There's just, man, so I'm really glad that you touched on mentorship because it's so important to have somebody that you look up to. Like if I'm going to be starting a podcast, I might come to you, Jason, go like, hey, I'm starting this podcast. I'm not looking for a coach, but I need somebody who can just give me 10, 15 minutes a week so that,
Yeah.
like start here, do that, whatever, and, avoid these pitfalls, whatever. Like that's so valuable for me, but it will also, if I were to do that, it would be valuable for you. You'd be like interested, like, hey, how's it going?
Sure.
How did it go? What,
Right. It helps me streamline my own process on that side of the things. I'm like, all right, well,
right.
here's what worked, here's what doesn't work. I mean, maybe I should
Exactly.
finally stop
Yes.
doing that
Yes.
myself, right?
Yes, right,
Right.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or and also this goes back to what we talked about off air, but this idea of collaboration, right? I mean, when you're in a sales job, again, I think a lot of your audience are in that kind of role where you feel like you're kind of on your own, right? You're on an island. It's you eat what you hunt and all of those stories. And creating communities within your environment. This is where the accountability group comes in. This is where, I mean, we talk about our accountability group is made up of three people. It's a mentor, and it could be multiple mentors, right? It could be your manager, it could be an actual mentor, somebody in your office who's kicking butt, it could be somebody at your church, or it's
Right.
like a million people that it could be. But then peers, people, they're on the same front lines that you are on, they're facing the same challenges every day, but you can share ideas and support each other and all that. And then definitely the people that are mentees, that you're actually ahead of where they are. They want to be where you are, and bringing, that's what the accountability is made up of. But there's your collaboration, there's your community, and all of that can create that consistency that's required to actually be something else and do
Yeah.
something else and have the things that you've always wanted to have.
And if anybody doesn't know how to get an accountability group together, just send me a message on Instagram and I'd
Yeah,
be happy to give you a worksheet that was put together on
perfect. Yeah,
how to structure one and how to organize one, right?
that's
So
great.
it doesn't have to be, we can demystify it really quickly versus listening to Rick and I talk about this
Yeah.
and like, okay, that's great, but how do I do them? Then what?
Yes. What is the
Right?
first steps?
Well,
Yeah.
what's that first steps and what would that look like in time frame? All that stuff is part of this worksheet. One of the things I would also challenge everybody to think about, and Rick, I'm sure you can, jump more in on this, is who do you pick to be in this accountability group or to partner with? This goes back to, right, if working with agents and like deciding who to hire as part of, if you're an agent broker versus, right, I'm assuming that's the same title across the country, that you're the person who hold people's license under you, right? Where, how do you choose who to bring onto your team and how do you not choose to bring onto your team, right? It's the same thing when relationships and friendships and anything like that, and even more like an accountability group where you look at everything through a lens of core values.
Hmm.
Because, people talk a big game, but you want people who align with that and are mission critical. And, what, you may have different goals, but your
Yes.
values overall overlap. And it may be even different core values, but those core values are synonyms to each other. They're not antonyms to each other.
Right. Right. And there's a Venn diagram maybe where there's some overlap or whatever.
Correct.
Yeah, I think that the other thing to consider in that is you basically, you've heard this. I don't know who said it first. I hear it regularly, but this idea that you are a sum of the five people you spend the most time with, right? And so,
Correct.
like, I'm really, and that's, um, I want to make sure that I'm hanging out. It's just like if you want to play tennis, you want to play tennis with people that are better than you, not worse. You can help the people that need, like you want to be that person for somebody else, but you don't want to spend your whole time being the best guy in the tennis court, I guess is what I'm
Right.
saying, right? You want to spend your time also being the guy that needs to be better, that is working towards it, right? And so
Yeah.
that's definitely a big part of it as well.
Well, think about that. I love your tennis metaphor because, who did you had Nadal and Federer, who, especially around the time Federer retired, and you had Nadal come out. I mean, one of my favorite sports pictures ever was the two of them sitting on the bench, crying hysterically, holding hands.
Ah,
Because the two,
I
I
haven't
mean,
seen that.
oh God, what an
But
amazing.
Djokovic too. I mean, at one point, the
Djokovic is now
three
in
of
that,
them are in there.
yeah,
Yes.
but I think there was something that, Djokovic came a little bit later in that
He
era,
was the last one. Yeah.
right? In that era, but
Right.
like as far as
Federer
like
first and then
Federer and
Nadal. Yeah.
Nadal, but like Nadal, like, but they really kept each other sharp. Now, Djokovic
Yeah.
obviously added to that,
Yeah.
but the kinship through this competition of iron sharpens iron type of
Totally.
pattern,
Yeah,
but
exactly. Iron
also,
sharpens iron. Yeah.
right, loving that.
Yeah.
But that image of, we didn't see that as much in the 80s and 90s in our worlds. And I think this is where we as men, especially, have evolved with vulnerability and
Yeah.
connection and intimacy
Yeah.
in that regards, and especially in the entrepreneurship business. And I think this is kind of the outcome of why my podcast became a thing was, I'm sitting in a therapy room 30, 40 hours a week, and I'm trying to take these wonderful ideas that I was starting to learn that I know other people were also interested in, but also getting in front of the people who are one, living it, two, the people who are teaching it, but three, maybe even some of the people who even created some of those ideas. I'm like,
Yeah.
well, and then reverse engineer the process.
Right.
But I'm seeing now, right, in the business world, I'm seeing it now even in psychology. One of the conversations I had locally was, why aren't we talking about these things where we as licensed mental health practitioners, like licensed medical professionals, right? Why aren't we talking about where coaches have actually done a better job at marketing than
Mm.
us and use,
Mm.
well, we don't talk about the past, therefore we're not therapists, as a thing like, no, 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 no. That's just called solution focused therapy. But they
Yeah.
did such a good job of remarketing and rebranding themselves that they're
Mm.
making therapy seem and look obsolete, which it obviously isn't, because
Mm.
we're still doing old marketing. We're
Mm.
still doing, right. We also have laws that, like, how can you market? What can you say? Can we use,
Right.
you can't just say client, Rick Warner said this was the best therapy session ever, because I can't break
Right.
confidentiality, right?
Yes, sure.
Coaches
Yeah.
don't necessarily have that.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
So,
you can't have review sites, I guess.
right, right.
Well,
So,
maybe you well, anyway, yeah, I got
but
you. Yeah.
right, we can nav. There's ways of, but
Yeah.
I think that, like, the space you're in, real estate space, and I'd love to talk about this, right? Because you have the one thing which came out of real estate, that was a
Yeah.
big
Right.
coaching right? In one of the worlds, and you have all these other new people in the real estate space, of all of, I think, like chiropractic, because you have all the people who now are doing functional medicine and integrative medicine, and a lot of them are, like, have become thought leaders. Dr. Joe Dispenza is
Yeah.
one of those people,
Yeah.
right? Who is a chiropractor who became one of the new Tony
Yeah.
Robbins. And then
Yeah.
you have all these people in the real estate world
Yeah.
that have just become, right, mindset thought leaders. Here's how to change your life. It's not just about, let me show you the square footage and here's a great
Yeah,
school
right.
system and all that stuff.
Yeah.
What has been your personal journey with that for yourself?
Mm.
Going from, right, because, we talked about, you went from point A to point B, which was struggling in school, addiction, to
Yeah, yeah.
having a stable life
Sure.
and have an incredible career and kicking it really well on the West
Yeah.
Coast. What made you see that I need to go from B to C?
Yeah, yeah.
And where has that process involved the thought leadership side, and where you're now taking this and applying it to, one, working with other people, but two, where that journey's been for yourself?
Yeah. Well, and so to me, hopefully there's constantly an evolution, but I will tell you that first of all, I think most people just end up in real estate. So I ended up in real estate in 2004. So I'm just coming up on 20 years in the business. And in 2005, I sold a fair amount of houses. And in West Coast, you don't have to sell a ton to make a pretty good living. 2006, I did well again. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've arrived. I'm like 34, 35 years old. And I've got three little kids. I got a stay at home wife, blah, blah. We buy $1 million house, 2006. I'm rocking and rolling. And then 2008 happens, September of
Mhm.
2008. And if you're for those listening, they don't know about what happened. It was bad. It was like just short of depression
Carnage.
bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was carnage.
Yeah.
The stock market got completely crushed, and the real estate market followed right after. And in outside of 5 months, everything went down 35%, and it stayed down for 35%. That was its own problem, but the volume of sales was no good anymore. Everything we dealt with was distressed, uh, short sales and foreclosures. Everything took a long time. It was a mess. It was a total mess, and I was wholly ill prepared for this.
Mm.
And in reality, so September of 2009, my 40th birthday, actually, I couldn't even pay my mortgage on my $1 million house with my stay-at-home wife and my three little kids, right? Two of which were in diapers, I think, at the time. And I had this real moment of like, oh my God, I am totally screwed. And I think I'm telling the story because there's people like that right now listening to this in their industry where the things have changed in the last couple of years where, so like, if there's any mortgage people listening, there are people facing that right now where they're like, my business is gone. Like, I'm not making any money. I don't know what to do. Right. And so what I had to do is really take a good, honest look at myself and go, oh, I wasn't great at this business. The market was great. The business itself was great. And it carried me along like a river. And now I need to actually learn how to be great in this business. And so I paid $800. I mean, I was in big, I had like $100,000 in tax debt. I had 50,000 in credit card debt. My line of credit had been taken away. Like I was in big, deep doo-doo, you know?
Mm.
And, and really I thought, do I need to get a real job? And then it was like, well, there is no real job that can get me out of this. So I really needed to be better at what I'm doing. The problem is I had no money. I, I was like, okay, somebody needs to teach me something, but I didn't know who that was or what that was. I found this class. It was $800. It was 8 Mondays. I did drive an hour and a half every Monday to get there, an hour and a half back. It was 8 hours a day. They asked us to do a bunch of stuff that I was like, ugh, man, this is so hard. I don't want, this is really uncomfortable. I don't want to do all this stuff. But I was so desperate that I really was willing to do it. And that was the beginning of me changing to actually knowing what I'm doing. And, not long after that, I paid off all my debt. And not long after that, I was the number one guy in our 170 person office. And I was making really good money in a market that not everybody was making really good money. And so the reason I tell you all of that is that if you're stuck, it may be that it's time for you to step up and find out who it is that's doing things that, that it's working, and then do those things. Like, it's no more complicated than that. It
Yeah.
does require getting uncomfortable. But the reason I say all that was it was such a life changer for me. And just like my experience in the 12-step program was like, wait, so now if I really want to keep this, I need to give it away. And so I started training people and helping other people and mentoring people so that they could have that same possible feeling of,
Yeah.
hey, anybody can do this. Like, I'm not extraordinary. I'm a 1.8 GPA guy, right?
Sure.
And so that's where my passion from helping others came from, was like knowing that deep, desperate, like, holy shit, I'm in big trouble here. There was nobody I could borrow money from. There was nowhere to turn. I was about to lose this $1 million house, and we didn't. I had one 30-day late. After that, I was able to hang in there. And later we sold it when we wanted to for a large profit, and blah blah blah. So it was definitely a happy ending story. But at the time, it was like, this is terrible. And it's like,
Sure.
no, that was actually the best thing that ever happened to me, because I really got to get in there. And it was very reminiscent of when I got sober when I was 20 years old. It was like, oh my God, I am totally screwed here.
Mhm.
And it was from that pain that I met all these people that helped me to learn and grow and create a spiritual way of living and all that stuff. But I couldn't have done that without having that desperate bottom of where I was like, oh, I'm in big trouble.
Yeah.
So, and funny enough, almost exactly 20 years apart from those two events, where I had these two real bottoms in
Hmm.
my life that were, they were game changers. So if you're listening and you're at that point in your life where it's like, oh, I'm in big trouble, this might be the greatest thing that's ever happened. This is an opportunity. You're not in big trouble. Take that fear and that anger and all the things and point it towards something great. Hire Jason, call somebody, whatever, and see what's on the other side of this, because it could be really, really great.
Yeah. Now, looking if you're 20 years out from that last experience,
Yeah, right.
how have you prepared differently? Because, right, you're in that 20-year window right now
Yeah,
from
right.
this
I
last
mean, I'm
experience.
getting
So
I'm getting into that. Yeah. So
you're,
probably I'm in the 15 years from that
you're in the,
point. Yeah, right.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, what would you find strategically is most different? Is it the fact that you're now invested in this mindset? Is it that you're doing these accountability groups and coaching and
Yeah.
getting
Yeah.
coached? And
Yeah.
is that the
Right.
biggest things? And do you find like there's still more stuff that you're like,
Why?
okay, this
Yeah.
would, yeah,
I mean, so it's funny to do. I find there's more stuff. The place where I want to live is I've come a long way, and that I have a long way to go. I want to be right there in that mindset of like, I want to acknowledge and appreciate and be willing to give away the fact that I'm not who I was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and 20 years ago. and I have something to offer, right?
Yeah.
And I'm totally crystal clear that I've arrived nowhere, that I still, I have still so much work to do. And what's been going on for me for the last 5 years is really more on the personal development side rather than on the business side. The business side, like that's going, right? It's working. I have a system and things are in place and I get to help other people. But the personal development side has been a totally brand new thing for me. And I
Mm.
really, not without realizing it, I kind of just got stale. I'd been sober maybe 28, 29 years, kind of cruising along and fine, nothing majorly wrong. It wasn't like I hit an emotional bottom or whatever, but somebody gave me a book, The Four Agreements, which is from the
Oh,
90s.
everybody should have that in there. It's
Oh, I mean,
usually
it
on
was
Amazon,
so
people.
great. Yeah. Yeah. I'm happy to hear you say that. I mean, it was for me, it just opened my eyes to like, oh my gosh, there's a whole nother world in there where I don't have to take things personally and I can stop making assumptions and I could just do the best I can every day and I can be impeccable with my word
Yeah.
and what that might lead to. And so it was from that it was like we started a personal development a little book club. And I mean, it's just been, I started going to Landmark, and I have a men's group that's led by a therapist like you that that we
Cool.
meet every other week, and like just all this stuff. I get to explore like survival roles and how I'm reacting to things, and start paying attention to neuroscience and my prefrontal cortex and my amygdala and how these things are interacting with each other, a neuroscience, blah 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 blah. And so I say, what's funny about all this is, so now I've spent like whatever 5 years doing that, and sometimes I'm like, I've learned nothing. You know what I mean? Like I'm still
Just
just a
scratching the
wreck.
surface.
I'm
Yeah,
still like, oh, well, only because I'll experience something, and this is what I want to ask you about. So,
for
so
sure.
I've done all that, I've done the work, I think, blah blah blah, and I'm like, okay, like for example, with my girlfriend and I know that I have that if she says even anything remotely sounding like I've done something wrong, that I hear as very critical. And what she's usually asking for is for me to be tender and kind to her in that moment, right?
Hmm.
And I intellectually, like if it's you and me, I'll sit in here like, okay, got it. There'll be a time for me to talk about however I'm feeling, but in this moment, I need to be your man. I need to take care of you. We use the analogy of she would say, I feel like I come to you with a skinned knee, and you start telling me why I shouldn't have been playing with those kids, and it's my fault that I skinned my knee, rather than just going, oh,
Yeah.
your knee is hurt. How can I help you? Right? Be tender and kind. And I'm like, okay, got it. So then I intellectually understand it. And then here she comes with her scraped knee again. And I'm like, basically like, well, that's not my fault. That's your fault. And da, 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 da,
Yeah.
da. Like I just go right
Well,
into
you
it.
found your don't bleed on the carpet in a way that you are
Yeah,
now living,
exactly. That's
right?
exactly
You're
right.
now right moving that forward
Yes.
to the next
And I will
generation.
say that since I did that work I was just telling you about, the degree of which I do that is, 80%
Hmm.
less. However, it's still there. And I'm like, oh,
Well,
I just want to be.
what if it is always going to be there at some level? Because
Yeah.
I think that's the default network, right?
Mm,
We have all this stuff stored there. I think part of it is one being neutral, so we can still always decide to act that way, but it has to be that choice versus only being compelled to act that way. And I think
mm,
the more work you're doing, you're opening up possibilities,
right.
because I don't know if at any given point every single thing will be neutral, because and like you're saying, you're dealing with numbness, you're dealing with right, the far end of neutrality is being numb, where it's supposed to bother you and you're just uh you know not, right? But then you
Yeah.
have this thing of like, okay, well, I want to completely experience this thing from a different lens. That takes that continued work. So the more work
Right.
you're doing, the more layers of the onion you're peeling away, the less it's going to have that
And
trigger.
the new neural paths too, is that?
Yeah, all the
Yeah.
changing the neural
Yeah.
pathways. And that's the whole thing cool about, like, everybody getting into psychedelics and mushrooms from the research, is that it actually
Right.
changes your neural pathways,
Yeah.
and gets back to anything before traumas and triggers, stuff like that. So, there may be some layer that will always be there. One of my favorite quotes from Esther Hicks from the Law of
Uh-huh.
Attraction
Yeah.
world is,
Yeah.
you'll never get it all done and you'll never get it all right.
Yeah.
So if that's part of at least releasing yourself from the resistance around having to be perfect every single time,
Yeah.
especially to loved ones and partners,
Yeah.
versus recompensating and recalibrating. Be like, hey, do you know what? Let me try that again. Or, hey,
Yeah.
you're right. Here's what I'm going to say. Here's what I should have said now then, but I'm going to say it to you now.
Yeah.
And just recalibrating yourself. I think it's that X axis,
Mm.
Y axis. Can you do it more often? And can you recalibrate more
Yeah.
quickly?
Quicker and with less
Right.
frequency and yeah.
Frequency
Right.
and duration, right? So I think if
Right.
that's part there, and maybe right, it's always going to be there, but I think that's why the work always needs to be done. The work is never done
Right.
because,
It's a practice, right? I mean, I mean, I definitely live in that state of not arriving, right? But we also have this metaphor of like it's like kind of climbing a mountain and
gravity's still there.
it's a summitless mountain, right? But on that mountain, sometimes the climbs are hard. Sometimes you don't even know, where to put your hands, and sometimes you're just walking up a path. You know where you're going, but it's just kind of hard work, and there's trees. But every now and then, you find this place where there's like a vista, right? And
Hmm.
it's a totally new view than you've ever seen before. And it's like, yeah, you can take a minute and enjoy that kind of that new place.
Sure.
And then, it's time to it's like, okay, that was awesome. Now let's stay on the path here, right? Let's stay
Yeah.
on the path so that we can get to that next vista.
And I think that's a good metaphor for, as you go through all the Yellowstone series of the original precursors of like when they started moving from, the South and the East and came across, and
I
moved out
can't
west.
talk to you about that because I don't watch the
Well,
show
right,
at
or
all, but
any of the frontier days, right,
gotcha.
of a
Okay, yeah.
settler, right, coming
Right,
across the
okay.
country, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the Oregon Trail of a video game
Hmm.
from the 80s, right?
Right.
And some people are like, oh, this is a really nice vista view, and this is beautiful. Look at these mountains, and it's gorgeous, and it's very fertile here.
Mm.
And like, I think we're gonna stay here. And then they have to go through their first winter, and they're like, okay, that was pretty bad. Then they go through the
Right,
second winter, and they're like, oh, F me. Like we
right,
can't grow stuff here, or whatever it might be,
right,
right? Or we thought it
right.
was fertile, but now we're going through
Yes.
a
Right. Yeah,
2 year
it's
thing. And
exactly. Yeah.
so some people chose to stick that out and
Yeah.
get it out, and some people continued moving on, right? And some people died, and some people didn't. I mean, well, they all died eventually, but you're right.
Yeah.
But I think that's kind of where you have to figure out like where is that comfortable place that you want to stick it out and go through a few seasons of this, and where do you want to like, okay, I really appreciate this, I really enjoy this,
Yeah.
cool, you know,
And it's and to your and saying enjoy too is like that is the other part of it is
appreciate it. Yeah.
enjoying the hike, right? Enjoying what that means. Like I'm a runner. I became a runner also in the last
Mm,
5 years. And that was never ever going to happen. I have no
right.
idea how that I definitely was. And I used to make fun of runners regularly. What is wrong with you? You could take a bike, you could ride, you could get a ride. I
Right.
will give you a ride.
You can swim.
You could swim. Like, what are you doing? Why are
Right.
you
Well, that's how
running?
you
What's
become a
wrong?
triathlete.
What's wrong with you?
That's
Yeah, yeah.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I became a runner, but I became a runner not initially to run a marathon. I became a runner to kind of well, first it was to experience that hey, maybe I could be a little bit, maybe I could go a little bit faster, maybe I could go a little bit
Uh-huh.
farther. But then in the experience of running, it actually changed how I felt so dramatically, not just when I was running, but like kind of who I was that I really enjoy running, even though I don't
Yeah.
enjoy it when I'm doing it all the time,
Sure. Yeah.
right?
That
But
absolutely makes sense. Yeah.
I don't have to grind. I'm like, oh, I'm not like nobody's making me run. Now, as a result of all that, I've run several half marathons. I've run 3 full marathons. I ran New York,
Congrats.
Chicago, San Francisco, all these things as a over 50-year-old man. In fact, I ran San Francisco last year and broke the 4 hour mark. And next I'm trying to qualify for Boston. But all
Whoa.
these things happened not because I set the goal of being a marathon runner, but because I am embrace the idea of being a runner. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Right. First of all, I want to stop for a second and acknowledge how ridiculously awesome that is.
Thank you. Yeah.
Because, right. And I know it's something you're like, yeah, I'm used to it now. I'm already doing these things. But
Yeah.
if you think go back to the 20-year ago you,
Yeah.
go back to the non-sober you.
Yeah.
What would that guy say if you, right, if you're like, yeah, you're gonna run half marathons, you're gonna do these three main, you're gonna, full marathons, and you're gonna drop a 4 hour, window, and what would
Yeah.
that version of you have said?
Well, it's funny because that version of me was so cocky and so
Hmm.
sure of myself that I might have been like, yeah, of course I'm going to do that. But what I would say is, I think it's better to go say to the 20, because I was 20 when I got to, so maybe the 25, 30-year-old version of me, or actually even the 45-year-old version of me.
Right.
I mean, I started running just a couple months before my 50th birthday, actually. So you could go back just a few years and say, what do you think, but seriously, going back to the 20-year-old version, I would say the life that I have been able to have as a result of the people that have come into my life and the choices that I've made to who to engage with and who to spend time with and who to trust and who to take risks with and do the things that didn't seem to make sense, but okay, I'm going to take the action and the insight will follow the action. There's no way I could have possibly imagined, we haven't talked about this, but I was living in a tool shed when I was 20 years old.
Mm.
That's the bet my best efforts at life had me living in a tool shed. And my entire time was, how am I going to get high today?
Yeah.
And that included stealing money, and that included lying to people, and that included, I had a 1-year-old baby that I had no interest in being a dad to, and like that's who I really was. That was my day-to-day existence. And
Yeah.
so you take that guy and you say, hey, here's you at 54. I don't think anybody else would have seen it, right? No,
Yeah.
there's nobody else that would have been like, yeah, that
Would have
sounds
said, "Are
right.
you on drugs?" Right.
Yeah,
That's what you
you're
would.
you're on drugs. Yeah, I am.
Yeah.
I lived in that tool shed 10 months sober before I got up to
Wow.
live in somebody's room. And that first year of being clean was literally the greatest year of my life. Greatest year of my life, because all of a sudden there was such a dramatic change going on in how I saw the world and what was possible for me. It was like, it was crazy. I mean, it was a roller coaster. I was always broke. There was nothing good on the outside
There's
going on
no
at all.
stability. Right. And that
Right. But
started
on the
creating that.
inside, all of a sudden I was being filled up with, dude, you're going to be okay. This is going to be
Yeah.
great. And you just keep doing this and your life's going to be great. And that's been my experience.
Yeah. So much more to do that. So I guess maybe wrapping it up, and I want you to talk a little bit about, your coaching program and what you're doing and how you're helping some other people, and then how people can find you. And
Mhm.
um I I always ask, like, if you're a runner, like anybody who has this like unique little niches, it's kind of like, all right, what's the tools and gears and sneakers and like,
Oh,
right. And just throw those out for people. Because I got into my Koros watch. I got rid of, I switched over and moved into the Koros structure instead of Garmin for
okay.
that. So, and only running
Well,
Hokas.
I'm
And
probably not the right guy to talk to about any of that stuff. I don't really, I use Nike shoes. I know a
mm,
lot of people don't like those.
I
Um,
can't run on them. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I had Hokas to start with, and my knees. I called my PT person and I go, hey, I need to see you my knees or whatever. She goes, what kind of shoes you wearing? I said Hoka. She goes, get rid of the Hokas.
Oh,
That's the only problem, and that's what happened for me. I put Nikes on. I've never looked back. My knees got better.
awesome.
So, but I don't want to say that because I know people love Hokas.
Right,
I know that
right.
is. I have
Little
no
tech.
idea why she
Well,
said that.
is there one thing you swear by that helps get you through training and get you through? Is there a nutrition thing? Is there a song? Is there something that just
So I would say that if you really want to be a runner, always have a race that you've got coming up, right? Like I just yesterday signed up for the San Diego half marathon. I'm coming off of a,
when is
a
that?
knee injury. What?
When's the San Diego?
Uh, March 24th.
Oh, so it's really soon. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm coming off a knee injury. That last marathon took it out of me, going running up and down the Golden Gate Bridge and back and forth and whatever.
Mm.
So I'm because my goal is to do to qualify for Boston. I have to do 3:35 to at my age
You
to
will
qualify.
do
Thank
3:35.
you. Yeah,
You don't
that's my
have to.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, but my big thing would be always have something you're training for, not because the goal itself, but just know like that to me, that's what bridges the gap. Like I
Yeah.
always have a race that I'm getting ready for, whether it's a 5K or a 10K or I mean, I generally don't get ready for 5Ks and 10Ks because now I run a
It's part of
10K.
your yeah, it's part of your
I run
daily
10Ks
weekly.
just all the
Right.
time,
Yeah.
whatever. But so that's what I would say about that. My coaching, I mean, if somebody's in real estate, I'm not on the podcast to necessarily pitch any coaching, but I do have, if you like that accountability thing I was talking about, on my website, you can go there and you can print out for free a download of our what we call our daily navigator, where you create the things that the daily tasks that you want, and then you create your accountability group. I have a little free. It's actually being uploaded this week, so it's not there this week, but by the time this airs, it'll probably be up. Which is a free little recorded thing that you can watch on how to create your accountability group and what things should be on your thing. And so that's flowcademy.com, FLOCADEMY, like the Academy of Living in Flow. Flow Academy is what that is.
And
And
not flow from 227, different flow.
no, no. And then you can follow me on Instagram, the Rick Warner. I'm on Instagram and I post weird shit there, but nothing. I mean, I post, I don't know. I post, there's nothing, I don't know. I don't even know why people would go there, to be honest, but they can follow me there if they want to.
Awesome. Awesome. Rick, I know there is so much more we can definitely get into and even go further down the rabbit hole of neurology, and especially as it plays out in the world of sales and marketing and branding and stuff like that. And I definitely would like to invite you back into all that, because I know that we're the tough place. And I think you hit it on the head where, when you're talking about the momentum of, oh, my business was doing well because the market was then, and I had to recalibrate everything
Right.
that,
Yeah.
in '08. I think we're seeing the same thing now post
Yeah.
pandemic.
Yeah.
And right, we saw there were certain businesses like Peloton or all these businesses that were, Zoom, it's
Crazy.
all right,
Zoom.
the
Yeah.
Zoom
Right.
stock, right? Or whatever it is. And
Yeah.
I'm still 94% telehealth. And ended up
Oh,
getting
really?
licensed in multiple states over the pandemic, which is
Okay.
great.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the only people I see in person is for that neuroemotional technique modality out of my condo rec room as
Wow.
a
Yeah.
high paid,
Yeah.
not cheap therapist. I'm not
Yeah.
going back into an office. So, but I see a lot of people, a lot of therapists were complaining like, hey, is anybody else not getting people calling them? Like I've been seeing that over the last number of months.
Mm.
And whether, even though they might be using Psychology Today or some of these other, websites and stuff like that, that their marketing isn't. I'm like, well, what's making you stand out and be the person?
Yeah.
And so it's
Well, and that's,
very
that's the
apropos.
thing, like, and you talk about, I mean, it's like as a business coach, I mean, because at someday I will be a business coach, because there's so many things that cross over that I don't
Sure.
have to
Yeah.
be,
It's
but
cross-pollination for sure.
exactly. And so, but so many, this is the crux of the thing, right? Everybody gets in the business to do the business they're in, to be a therapist, to be
Hmm.
a hair cutting person, whatever it is. And there's still two parts to it. There's the doing the business part, being a therapist. You can be a great therapist, but if you don't have any clients, who cares, right?
Yeah.
And so then there's
Yeah.
the same attorneys, doctors, not so much, but these guys, everybody needs to have that some version of lead generation. They need to create business, and they want to think that if they are just so great that that will happen. Well, maybe, but that there's a way to accelerate your greatness and turn it into something where people, the business is coming your way.
Right.
Because
And
we
people
don't,
need
we
to know
don't,
you
we don't, we're
exist.
not an advocate of spending money on advertising. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but I mean, there's a way to be relational and create this kind of ongoing source of business coming your way. And I think that a lot of that stuff cross pollinates. So
Yeah. And people talk trap like BNI. What an amazing organization,
right.
right? And stuff like that. And it's in there. I mean, but even if you're not in a BNI networking group, read Dr. Ivan Meisner's books on. I mean, the guy is a guru.
Yeah.
I remember going once to a BNI like breakfast meeting. My buddy invited me to, and I've met Ivan Meisner. He's friends with Rick, who's my business coach. So I've had multiple conversations with Ivan. And I remember talking to people at BNI. I'm like, have you guys read any of his books? And they're like, who? I'm like, wait
Yeah.
a minute,
Well,
this is the guy who.
Bob Berg is another one. They're friends, I think, the two of
Okay.
them. Endless referrals. And I want your listeners to also just hear, like you just brushed over this, and I'm sure you talk about it all the time, but you guys, did you hear that Jason just said my business coach? Like, I have a business coach. I'm coached all the time. Like I make a lot of money. I coach people, but none of that means I don't need to be coached anymore, because I can't coach myself, to be honest. Right. I'm not
Yeah.
gonna, it just doesn't work like that. So I just wanted to
Yeah.
highlight for your listeners too. Like,
Awesome. All right. Well, everybody, if you've gotten any value out of this, or someone who would, please just do us a favor and share this episode out to someone who, especially if they are in the real estate world, but also if they're in the personal development mindset. the cliche, those words, those buzzwords that we're trying to figure out what better words to use for this. But as always, Rick, thank you so much for sharing your time and passion and wisdom with us. And I definitely would love to continue the conversation
My
in the
pleasure, Jason. I
future.
really, really appreciate you having me on. And this was a great conversation for me. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks, brother.